Now let's get started. Hello and welcome. On behalf of the steering team of CanCOVID, I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. There's some slides that I'm sharing that are up because I want to direct your attention for all of our CanCOVID members out there. We have some challenge questions that are being circulated. We're seeking your feedback. If you go to the CanCOVID Slack and the announcements channel, you'll find a list of all of them. Here's one from, this is a request that's been issued from the Deputy Health Minister of Canada. So please weigh in on that one. We've also got a challenge question that we are planning on sending to the provincial health ministers about back to school strategies and what your recommendations based on science might be. Importantly, our feedback to the Canadian Immunity Task Force that has just been started, and this is your chance to weigh in. This one has a deadline of tomorrow morning, so this one is a short timeline, but the other two we've extended the deadline a week, so you have another week to weigh in. So I look forward to hearing all of your thoughts on that. Thank you so much. I will now mention some Zoom etiquette, so please keep your mic muted if you're not speaking. We will have a Q&A after Ramy has finished his presentation. You can either raise your hand or type a question into the chat box and I'll read it for you. So with that business taken care of, without further ado, please, Ramy Saleh.
Thank you. I guess I need to share my screen again, right?
Yes, correct.
Perfect. We're good?
Yep.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ramy Saleh. I'm a medical oncologist as well as a trialist. I'm based in Montreal, part of the McGill University Health Centre. Today, we will talk about the COVID clinical trials that are being done in Canada with some of the issues that have been brought up to my attention by some of my colleagues as well as myself, and a few pointers on how we can overcome them. My disclosures are the following. I will not be speaking about Airmed Trials. However, I will be speaking about covidtrials.ca, which has partnered up with the CanCOVID initiative. So we'll start by where are we in clinical trials, as well as the challenge encountered, the flatten the curve effect, but from the medical perspective, the media repercussions, the good and the bad. I'll speak about the covidtrials.ca, and then I'll leave the floor for any questions. So conducting trials, how easy is it? I always like to give the metro examples in my presentation. So very briefly, in very simple terminologies, in an ideal world, we would hope that clinical trials are conducted in a very easy manner. And this is the easiest subway station that I found when I was living in Toronto, which was only 2 lines, very simple to use. However, in reality, conducting trials can be very complicated, especially with collaboration and finding funding. And did we reach our target or not, and the quality of our trials. So it's very complicated, and this is the most complicated metro station that I've seen, which is the one of Tokyo. However, it would be nice if we can meet midway, and this is where I live right now, Montreal Metro, this somewhere in the middle. So I do hope that clinical trials can be as easy as the metro stations that I just gave. Pre-COVID, trial planning is very complicated. It can take 2 to 3 months, and this is me being generous. It's the time to come up with the idea, finding collaborators, finding the funding, finding the personnel that are needed to be conducted. Submitting to Health Canada sometimes can take up to a month, depending how much Health Canada is busy. Also, depending on where you are and depending which REB you're submitting to, it can take up to a month, if not more. There are some bottlenecks with REBs. It's very hard to get collaboration in an ideal world. And we also have the silo effect, what I like to call the silo effect, meaning we have our own trials and it's very hard for us to share information or actually collaborate very easily. COVID really changed the perspective of things. Now, REB has faster turnaround times, and we all agree that the biggest factor for that is nobody is submitting any trials to REB except with trials related to COVID, but it does show that we can conduct trials faster from an REB perspective. Health Canada is definitely dedicated to approve trials faster. We have an amazing phenomena, and this is a shout out for CanCOVID, where, for example, the covidtrials.ca initiative was successful because we were able to connect with researchers all across the country much easier. we are also enforced to collaborate nationally, meaning it is not easy to open a single institution trial during the COVID times. We're being encouraged as researchers to have cross provinces trial in order to recruit faster. So the silo effect is not really present. It just started happening again. And so what I would like to say is what used to take 6 months now takes approximately 6 weeks. So post-COVID, is it actually time to spend more efforts on a successful provincial or even national REB? I think we are proving to each other that collaboration can be done and ethics can be done in a faster pace. Health Canada has improved and helped us to submit an IND is taking 5 to 10 business days, which is much faster than before. The only question that I have, which is something we need to think about, is how do we sustain the pan-Canadian collaborations? Should the hashtag CanCOVID right now become CanTrials in the long run? And where are we in COVID trials at the moment? Right now, the trials are being conducted all across the nation. Looking at Health Canada, they have listed 25 active ones, and those are only the Health Canada approved. On clinicaltrials.gov, we have more trials available, and definitely some trials that are being conducted are on neither platform. However, I am not a fan of both. Reason being is the Health Canada only lists the trials. It's not easy to try to find, the eligibility criteria, etc. And clinicaltrials.gov do not update on a day-to-day basis. They wait on the PIs to update. For example, CATCO, if you look at it, it says that it's only in 3 provinces, but we do know that there are more provinces who are taking part in CATCO as we speak. One of the reasons why we launched covidtrials.ca is we wanted to encourage people and we wanted to encourage the Canadian public to try to identify trials and see what trials are being conducted in their area. So with the help of Dylan McKay and also Lauren, from Manitoba and Alberta, they were able to help us out have this interactive map where we can either look at the table on the left or on the interactive map on the right and search for the trials much easier. From a researcher perspective, we can search for those trials either by free text, we can search by the trials by their phase, or by the location of where the trials are being conducted. And it contains similar information as the one in clinicaltrials.gov. The fears are, right now, we are worried about making sure we're not duplicating the work. If we look at Health Canada, there are still new trials being conducted with hydroxychloroquine. And if we look at those trials, some of them, the newer ones, look like they're competing with the trials that have already been activated in Canada. There's also the issue with speed among provinces, which I noticed by talking to some of my peers, where in one hospital in one province, you can submit the trial and start it within 2 weeks, while in others you have to wait 3 to 4 weeks. And this causes a bit of a stress and anxiety between collaborators where they do not want to wait 1 to 2 more weeks, given that it will hinder the recruitment. So some people started to going into the solo and the silo effect that we are noticing right now. What I think post-COVID is technology needs to adapt. Clinicaltrials.gov was approved by the American government in 1999 and was launched in February of 2000, and it has never been updated. We don't have a Canadian trial site with live updates. We have more tech than in the year 2000. We have more resources, and the resources are actually cheaper. And I do think there is a way of making sure that we have a Canadian hub with all the clinical trials being there. To give you an idea, in 2000 versus now, this used to be LED of the year 2000 that I searched, used to take half the room and cost $12,000, and the same technology now is cheaper and more lenient. So I do feel that we have an opportunity as researchers and doctors to spend an effort with the federal government to have a clinicaltrials.gov, but more Canadian-based. What about the flatten the curve effect? From the public's perspective, flattening the curve is actually great. However, flattening the curve from a trial perspective can make us realize that in some ways we are late to open more trials. These are the numbers in Quebec, and in the lower right corner you see in red, these are the ICU admissions. And if you can see from the 5th of April until today, the number of admissions in ICU has been the same. Over the last 48 hours, there has been 0 admissions in Quebec in intensive care units. Also, we can see in orange the admissions to the hospital. And we can see that the delta from day to day is not changing. On the contrary, it's starting to flatten. So less admissions and less ICU transfers means there are less people that can be recruited to the trials. And the question is, did we pass the peak? So the flatten the curve effect might actually prove to us that opening more inpatient trials, especially in ICU, might become a bad idea, especially if the trial needs to include 1,000 patients. Because we have to be realistic also about the times. There are already issues with recruitment that are being felt, where it's harder and harder to include patients or tap into the patients, especially the ones conducting trials in the outpatient setting. And the idea is, if we have to open more clinical trials, especially national ones, should we focus more on outpatient, given that the rate of admissions have been dropping lately? What about the media repercussions? It's a double-edged sword. When the media likes us, they can talk about us very well. And then when there's a bad news, it can affect us negatively. And we see the same thing in clinical trials. This is one article that I read where a woman actually consented to be part of 2 COVID-19 vaccine trials. From a trial point of view, that does not make sense at all. So the media can actually confuse the participants and the Canadian public about the clinical trials out there. In addition to that, I think the President of the United States was the best person to support hydroxychloroquine and was the best media front, I would say. However, the moment the media caught fact that probably hydroxychloroquine could be of a negative effect, we still don't know because most of the trials did not finish yet. The media did have an effect on recruitment. And this is one trial that focuses on hydroxychloroquine. As you can see, the recruitment rate started dropping. And the question is it because of the media? We all, and this is one of my things on my bucket list, which is to publish in the New England Journal of Medicine. So we all used to think that this is the way to publish. However, recently, this became the new standard of publishing, where I find it to be very bizarre that we forgot I would say, the research etiquette and the publication etiquette. And as we see, the moment we published the Gilead study, their stock market also got affected. And the question is, now with the big hype on remdesivir, how the other trials will proceed with the news of Gilead at the moment. In addition to that, what will happen to the remdesivir trials that are actually being conducted right now? Should they stop? Do we continue them? Do we change? It was pretty bizarre, in my opinion, of how the White House was able to publish the Gilead information while it was really mentioned that the statistical significance was not reached. And how will the FDA ripple effect affect future trials or trials that are being submitted to the REB right now with the remdesivir information that has been published? And finally, I will touch base on covidtrials.ca. And for the French speakers out there, there's the essaycovid.ca. It's the same thing. It's a new proof of concept, and it was supported by CanCOVID. So the thought why we initiated this, it's the first pan-Canadian initiative to encourage trial participation by actually asking the Canadian public to participate and register their information so we can match them to trials. It's a proof of concept. When we checked outside Canada, there was no initiative like this one for COVID. IQVIA did almost a similar thing in the US a couple of days after covidtrials.ca. In my personal opinion, and I'm biased because I've been the founder of this, it's a great opportunity to highlight the importance of clinical trials to the public. I think this is a golden opportunity for us to raise awareness to the Canadian public about the trials that we are conducting and why it is important to volunteer to those trials. There are already recruitment issues being felt by the large outpatient setting clinical trials who need to recruit 3,000 patients and above, where it's becoming very hard to recruit the patients, and we call it the hunt for the patients. So this is the website. I took just snap pictures where we have a clear message to the Canadian people to help complete the circle, as we call it, in order to register. This is one of our logos. And what we encourage them is to go in, register, fill in some medical information that will help us match them to a trial next to them. And the system started matching those people. So without any ads, we have approximately 1,000 visits a day. We have more than 500 participants registered so far, and some of them have already been matched to trials. And the media started getting attention, and this is what I call the good media effect. We have more than 10 partners, and we're growing. And I do encourage every single one of you, if you don't mind, to help us spread the word, collaborate with us. Let us take advantage of this unique opportunity to join forces against COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Remy. That was fantastic. I would now like to invite anybody who has a question to, as I mentioned, either raise your hand and speak up, or go ahead and put it into the chat box and I can read it off for you.
Marek Radomski, Saskatchewan, University of Saskatchewan. I could not agree more with our speaker. I think the big damage given by the politicians pretending that they are scientists or doctors are immense. Sadly, even some experienced investigators and physicians and doctors, they succumb to this trend. It's starting from Fauci giving the data which shouldn't be given yet, of the paper which shouldn't be reviewed yet, etc. Having said so, it's an immense problem because our frontline doctors, when faced with dying patients, they would obviously do everything that is needed, including a hydrochloroquine, even if the drug might be harmful and is harmful for the arrhythmic patients. So I guess the only solution I can come is unified front of the Canadian doctors speaking in the same voice. There are lots of good trials going around. We've got to wait until evidence is ready to be presented. Presenting the evidence prematurely does more harm than good. Thank you.
I agree with you 100%. This is why I brought it to the attention of the group, the effect of the media and the negative repercussion. I think the recruitment rate in a lot of trials started dropping. There has been more interest by family members of patients asking us about this medication. Why are we not putting people on this medication? It is affecting not only the recruitment, I think it's also proving to be challenging to conduct new clinical trials without writing it in our proposal and our rationale, trying to convince the readers, why are we doing the trial? Why are we not focusing only on the remdesivir medication?
We've got a question from the chat box. Kara asks, what advice do you have to try to standardize outcomes so that the trials are comparable? Are the principal investigators of each trial talking to each other? And if not, how might this problem be addressed?
So, yeah, I agree. I think the most important thing is not to do the Gilead mistake and change the primary outcome in the middle of a trial. I think that's the biggest no-no. I think when I read in the CanCOVID, there's a lot of investigators who are trying to collaborate to ensure that the primary outcome is the same. Generally speaking, if you look at the 25 trials, out of those, the ones in inpatient ICU, they all have the primary outcome, which is avoid death and trying to extubate the patient early. The trials who are being conducted in the outpatient setting, they all also share similar, there is nuances, but the primary outcome is always trying to avoid the patient coming to the hospital. I think from a primary outcome point of view, whether it's an outpatient setting, inpatient non-ICU or ICU trial, more or less the primary outcome is the same. Personally, what I will find challenging over the next couple of months is, given that we are flattening the curve, opening more clinical trials in the tens of thousands of patients, I will find it to be very challenging to complete those trials within 6 to 8 months.
Thank you. We have another question from the chat box. How are you promoting the patient portal so far? And in general, what part of the country are most of the patients registered from?
I am not at liberty, given that this is patient confidential information, to say where are the patients are coming from. To be fair, I can say very comfortably that the patients are coming from all the provinces. At the beginning, we tried doing this exercise without any advertisements. We have a little bit of funding that we obtain. So what we'll do is, we know everybody's sitting either on Facebook or on Instagram. So these are the two ways where we're going to put advertisements to encourage people. What we are also targeting is patient advocate groups to try to spread the word.
And we've got a patient advocacy engagement channel right on CanCOVID. So there you
And
go.
it helped us very much, by the way. So thank you very much for that.
Fantastic. Will the trials platform help to harmonize studies, but also help participants keep track of participants who co-enroll in cross trials, for better or worse, as in the vaccine trial example that you gave?
So if we're talking about the platform that I mentioned, the covidtrials.ca, yes. So the hope also, there is a tab for researchers and participants to collaborate, and they will get directly channeled to CanCOVID if they did not hear of CanCOVID. The purpose is, what we want to ensure is, harmonization between groups. The reason also is we want researchers to go on the covidtrials.ca and see what trials are being conducted, so they don't replicate the trial yet again. From the perspective of vaccines, the way the system matches the patients is the patient can be matched to multiple trials if the second trial they match to actually allows having patients who are already participating in another trial before that. So that does work too.
Okay. What is the mechanism for recruiting existing trial participants into other trials? How do you deal with consent?
So the covidtrials.ca, there is a general consent form where all the information are being stored on a PIPEDA approved cloud that has been approved in every province. So all this is the information has been stored safely, and we use a third company for that, outsourcing company for that, called Think Research, who gave us the cloud for free and support also for free. So we're very appreciative of that. The moment they consent for two things. They consent that they will share the information with us, and two, that the moment the system matches them to a trial, we will share part of that information with the coordinators and the lead PI, so they communicate with the patient and proceed forward.
Great. So does recruitment focus exclusively on infected individuals? Are controls recruited as well?
So I think that's a question from Michael, right?
Yes.
So I do encourage you to visit covidtrials.ca. We actually want every single Canadian out there. The reason being is there are studies for people who were exposed, studies for people who have COVID, who recovered from COVID, as well as the vaccines that are coming in for volunteers. So our platform will include everybody.
So get there and register.
Go register.
Chris asks, do you have any advice regarding the problem of clinical trialists being overwhelmed? I found out about a wonderful trial yesterday to the clinical trialists, and all responded that they are already doing 4 to 5 trials and they have no additional bandwidth. Good trials that can't be done.
I share the same frustration. I mean, I'm probably one of those trialists who have 4 or 5 trials and are, rejecting. The problem is we already are forced to take part in CATCO, and we will have to take part in Concord too. So everybody will become very busy to initiate new trials. What I find challenging is, I think if you have an idea and you're thinking of initiating a trial next month, probably that will definitely be a bad idea. The reason being is the amount of trialists and healthcare professionals who are on the line are already spread thin. So I'm not sure, the problem is personnel, right? We cannot create more personnel at the present time. What I think would help is if we find ways to connect to satellite hospitals who can help us with recruitment and with personnel, so we can open trials faster. That I think would be helpful.
Great. Kara asks, how can we ensure that underrepresented populations are recruited? Because typically those are the ones who are most at risk. Racialized groups, Indigenous persons, those of low socioeconomic status.
So I just touch on that very quickly. I think the satellite hospitals need to be approached. They don't have the proper foundation, but we are talking among each other about quick training for trialists or researchers who are interested to conducting trials. I think if we're able to do that with the technology of CanCOVID or whether covidtrials.ca, this will help provide an opportunity to hospitals who did not conduct trials before, or at least find proper mechanisms of referrals. To be honest, almost all outpatient trials will ship the medication to the home of the patient. The only question is, how do we find the patient? If we increase awareness in the hospitals that are really spread way far from cities, I think they can conduct those types of trials too.
Great, thank you. So a question for I missed one. Fatima, she has a question regarding the registration through the website and the issue of nominal and medical information policy. Does the Think Research, who owns the cloud, have access to this data, and how are you ensuring confidentiality?
Excellent question. They do not have access to this data. We have a medical leadership committee that consists of more than 10 physicians all across the country with excellent knowledge on clinical trials. And we have an agreement with Think Research that they cannot tap in. So the only people who have access to the information are the medical leadership people. And we have ways of checking activity log and who's accessing the data to ensure that they don't have that. And by the way, part of the consent does mention that once COVID trials are done, or if the trials are too old, their medical information will be deleted automatically. So we're not going to use this to publish or commercialize in any way.
That's great to know. And there's a question about elaborating further on the distribution of the registrants, because how would this person, this was the person who asked the question about where people are registered from, and they're not sure how this would violate privacy law, just to give some ballpark distribution, because the concern is that Canada is a really big country and this might benefit Ontario and Quebec since it originated here in the East, and measures to promote it should take this into consideration to make it truly pan-Canadian.
I agree. So I can tell you that more than 60% of the patients are not from Ontario or Quebec.
Okay.
So that just to make everybody feel a little bit more comfortable. In my opinion, I'm from Montreal and I have connections in Quebec and Ontario, so it's easier for me to connect with those two provinces. The reason why we included medical leaders from different provinces, and I would like to have even patient advocates who can be part of the medical leadership group, is to try to spread the word faster across the other provinces.
Yes, so spread the word. Michael Maida asks, is there a way to work with Canadian Blood Services and Héma-Québec to recruit when people donate?
They are our two partners.
Oh,
we already partnered with them, and I think the system already matched around 20 people to go to them and donate their blood.
Fantastic. Lisa Schwartz asks, can the platform help encourage research studies to enable and plan for participants who want to co-enroll in multiple studies when this is advisable?
It can help to encourage. I am pretty sure we're not doing that at the moment. I think our first focus was just to establish the platform and make sure we can safely and properly obtain the patient's information and the participants' information. But I would say yes, but not yet.
Okay. Yes, but not yet. And we're just about out of time. So and there's no more questions. So I want to thank you very much for sharing everything. It was absolutely fascinating to hear. I would like to remind the audience to get to the CanCOVID Slack to answer those challenge questions and weigh in. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Ramy.
Thank you very much for having me.
Have a good afternoon.
You too. Bye.